Mr. Shah, thank you for your testimony. I was on the Judiciary Committee last year when you testified. You were very powerful. It made quite an impact on me in terms of how I view this issue. Can you just describe how has this event impacted your family?
Oh, it's pretty much like Obama said, it fundamentally transformed us. You know, I mean, it's been 7 years, and me personally, I still don't even believe it happened. You know, my brain, I'm still asking me, is it true, and stuff like that. You know, my son's mother, she's still in the military. She's at Fort Hood, Texas right now. So she's grieving, you know. She hasn't been the same since. I have my other son was 8 years old at the time. He's now 16, and we're scared for him. You know, he's living in the Army base in Fort Hood because we think that's safer than L.A. So it's, you know, my mother, the whole family we've all just devastated.
Is there any doubt in your mind that your son's death could have been prevented?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, we see it as being murdered by invisible people because he shouldn't even been here. So he shouldn't be dead. You know, if the Homeland Security or ICE would secure the border, he would have never been here. You know, he was brought over at 4 years old, and like they say, they think just because you're brought over, then you're like a child of God, so they don't even watch on. You know, the guy who murdered my son was in the country 15 years before he killed my son. So that shows that just because they're brought over as kids, that doesn't mean for the future. You know, you're putting everybody in jeopardy for in the future that it might happen. So you check them early. You have to do your job, secure the border. That's the main thing.
When you hear that 36,000 convicted criminals who were in the country illegally were released in 2013, and now 1,000 of those have already been convicted of new crimes, what do you think of that?
You know, to be truthful, it pisses me off. I hate to say it like that, but it does, because the guy who murdered my son, he was in a car with 2 other people. The guy in the back seat was just there because he had to document that he got out of the car and he killed somebody black. He had to be there to document it. The guy in the back seat has since murdered someone since then. So someone else's child was murdered like 3 years after my son, but it could have been avoided if they would have deported him. It's just no one, we feel like no one cares.
Mr. Ronnebeck, thank you for your testimony, and please accept my condolences for your family's loss. How has the family been impacted by Grant's murder?
You know, this can only be described as a family's worst nightmare. Grant was such a lively young man and a loving young man. He was a mentor to his younger brother. He was by all accounts of my brother, who was Grant's father, he's just one of the best kids that a parent could ever have. You know, I wish I could say that the pain is quickly going away, but it isn't. It's going to be a long time.
Now, in your opinion, obviously, with the circumstances involved in the murderer is being convicted and then being detained and released, is it your opinion that this death could have been prevented had government done a better job here?
Absolutely. You know, this guy was a convicted felon that ICE released. I mean, they never even had him in custody. They released him on a bond. If he had remained in their custody and had been deported, this wouldn't have happened.
And I'll ask the same question I asked to Mr. Shah. When you hear that just 2 years ago, 36,000 criminals were convicted who were in the country illegally, they've been released, and now of those, 1,000 have already been convicted of new crimes. How do you feel about that?
It makes me angry. It is just ludicrous that the policies of our Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency are that flawed that they are allowing these criminals to go free.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughn, we hear talking points about the number of removals being high under President Barack Obama's administration, and that they're higher than they've ever been under previous administrations. But isn't the reason for that they changed the criteria for what counts as a removal? So you're counting people under President Obama's administration who would not have even been counted under Bush, Clinton, or Reagan.
That's exactly right, and Secretary Johnson has testified to this exact point, that the numbers today are not comparable with prior administrations. What they've done is taken cases from the Border Patrol that get turned over to ICE for processing, and they're counting those for ICE, and sometimes also for the Border Patrol. So it's important to look at removals of all three DHS agencies, to look at returns and removals, and in particular to look at what's happening in the interior of the country, because that's what people notice, and that's where the public safety problems are created when ICE is not deporting people from the interior of the country. Right now, 2/3 of the deportations that ICE is taking credit for are actually people who were arrested by the Border Patrol.
We've also heard about how some of the released criminals, look, DHS, they had to release them. That was kind of the law. Can you speak to that? Are these discretionary, or are they all just mandatory where there's no other option?
There are some of them that are non-discretionary, a small number. I was told that approximately 3,000 of the 36,000 from 2013 were due to the Zavidas decision that was referenced earlier. Most of them, though, are the result of the prosecutorial discretion policies, the prioritization, that ICE agents are told they're not to take action against most of the people that they encounter, and so they get released.
And my final question is, there are instances in which you will have somebody who's in the country illegally, they'll get convicted of a serious criminal offense. Maybe DHS will want to return them to their home country, and maybe there's resistance from the home government. But isn't there a provision of the law that if that happens, the DHS Secretary is supposed to notify the Secretary of State so that the Secretary of State can suspend visas from that country until they accept their national, correct?
That's right.
And has Secretary Johnson or his predecessor, have they ever, to your knowledge, notified State that some of these countries are not accepting these their foreign nationals?
My understanding is that they have not asked the Secretary of State to impose visa sanctions.